Up straight. Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 17th of April. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with continuing fallout over Moscow's decision to sell S-300 missile defense system to Tehran, and the declaration from U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Martin Dempsey that, despite this development, the American military option to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons remains intact.
We've known about the potential for that system to be sold to Iran for several years and have accounted for it in all of our planning. The military option that I owe the president to both encourage the diplomatic solution and, if the diplomacy fails, to ensure that Iran doesn't achieve a nuclear weapon is intact.
Russian President Vladimir Putin remains dismissive of the international criticism over the S-300 deal by trying to put a positive spin on the decision. During his annual televised call-in show to answer viewers' questions, he credited Iranian willingness and flexibility to resolve its nuclear dispute with the West to prompt the renewal of the contract to supply the sophisticated system. He insisted that the deal poses absolutely no threat to Israel because he said the weapons are exclusively defensive. He also suggested that the S-300s could serve as a successful deterrent to further violence in the Middle East, particularly in Yemen. The 62-year-old leader also said that his nation still works as one with its partners at the United Nations regarding policy on Iran. He then took a jab at his critics, saying that if anyone is concerned that Russia has begun to cancel sanctions against the Islamic Republic, then they are unaware that supplies of these types of systems are not included on the UN's list of banned measures. Professor Gerald Steinberg explains what it means for Russia to sell Iran the S-300 missiles.
Putin, who's a very clever hard politics operator, says, look, we had this agreement in Lausanne. We're very close to breakthrough. The sanctions are going to be lifted. I want to get in there first. This is big bucks. We had this deal. We gave up the profits we would have made by suspending or freezing it. Now we're going to head and go forward. It's really saying the idea that we could reimpose sanctions if the Iranians didn't behave themselves, all of that. Putin is just basically sticking out his thumb on this thing and saying, no, we're not going to do this.
So if, in fact, the deal does not happen and there are more sanctions, it would be hard to get everyone on board.
Well, I think we've already seen that. Russia and China and anybody else, a lot of companies in Europe are already rushing out to Tehran to sign deals. What are you going to all of a sudden say, no, you can't do that? That's maybe some of them will be stopped where the governments will exert enough force. The European governments, Germans and others, might be able to be persuaded to do that. Russia and China, there's no such leverage. They've been itching to get these deals. Iran wants both the arms and the economic deals that they have not been able to have since sanctions were imposed. So this process, we're already seeing the collapse of the regime, and Russia goes in first, as they almost inevitably do. There's not a whole lot that can be done to prevent that. It's big bucks, it's jobs, it's important to Putin.
And we can assume that other countries will also jump in now to reestablish deals with Iran.
Yeah, I would certainly. The Chinese are going to try to sell things, to, including weapons. Let's start with the weapons, but then oil drilling equipment, other things which embargoed, banking services, and then if the doors open or the dam bursts or whatever analogy, then all the Europeans are going to rush in and do that as well. It's already happening. The flights are full, we hear from Europe, going to Tehran as executives try to sign up deals with their Iranian counterparts.
What will be the military implications for these deals opening up between the many countries and Iran?
Israel and the United States or anybody else who can contemplate some military confrontation with Iran does not want to see the Iranians get advanced anti-aircraft equipment. But I think it's even more than that. The military problem is not so much Iran. Those can be overcome. But it's the potential of transferring them to Syria and then to Yemen and all the Iranian clients, and to Hezbollah. So that if there's a confrontation, if Hezbollah starts to attack Israel with thousands of missiles, that scenario that IDF officials have warned about over the last few months. And now, if Hezbollah then takes, these are truck-mounted, the S-300s are truck-mounted, they can move very quickly. They get moved over to southern Lebanon to protect the Hezbollah assets, and that means we're going to get a lot more missiles. It'll be harder for the IDF to knock out the Hezbollah command centers and missile launching facilities. So that's a real concern there, and I think that probably was part of the discussion between the Prime Minister and President Putin. If you got to do this for economic reasons, we're going to condemn it anyway, but make sure that you can push a button somewhere they don't get transferred to Hezbollah. And that may be something that Putin may agree to.
Why would Iran agree to it, and how are they going to be able to control it once it's in the hands of the Iranian regime?
Those are all important questions, and the question is to what degree does Russia maintain some sort of ability to control where those go? We don't know the answer to that.
Joining me now here in the studio to discuss all the latest political and diplomatic events is senior correspondent for Bloomberg Israel, Kalev Ben-David. Hi, Kalev. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure to be back, Aaron.
Good to have you back. So, all right, on our first topic is going to be these S-300 missiles, the sale from Moscow to Tehran. How significant do you think it is?
Well, I think it is significant. I think the significance is less in the sale of this particular item as in the timing of the announcement. The Russians did not even wait, what was it, perhaps a little bit, about a week since the announcement of the Lausanne Agreement. Remember that the sanctions have not been lifted yet. So they have not even waited for the official lifting of the sanctions to announce that they would proceed with the sale of the S-300s. This, as Professor Steinberg said, this undermines the whole sanctions regime. But
you're not paying attention to what Putin said. You're just dismissing the fact that he claims this wasn't covered.
No, I think Putin is being disingenuous. It's true. This wasn't covered officially in the sanctions. Nevertheless, the Russians did agree to suspend the sale of the S-300s because of it, in the spirit of the sanctions. Now, I've talked to a couple of Russian analysts this week who said, what's motivating Putin? Why did he jump in so quickly? A big reason is money, economics. The Russian economy is in free fall because of the drop in the price of oil, which is one of its main exports, and also because of the sanctions the Europeans and U.S. are putting on it against Ukraine. They need money, and this is a nice big-ticket item for them to sell. And what else can they sell? Other weapons, other arms sales. This could be the start of really a renewal of major arms sales between Russia and Iran, and that's the significance of it. It sends a bad message about where Russia may be going in terms of stepping up its arms sales to the Islamic Republic, and that is a reason. Even if this S-300 itself, we heard Dempsey, maybe the U.S. could overcome it. It's unclear whether Israel would have the capacity in terms of a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, and the sale hasn't gone through yet. It could still be affected, but it's the timing of the announcement that is significant and is very problematic for Israel especially.
All right, now let's talk about the talks themselves and trying to get an agreement by June 30th. But, of course, now we have this bipartisan congressional bill, which it looks most likely that it will pass, that will give Congress oversight for 52 days, that they can either approve, disapprove, or even take no action. What do you think we're going to see at the end of that period of time?
I think what we're going to see is pushback, again, from the Congress to President Obama if he proceeds with the agreement as it is written. It's quite interesting. I think that President Obama tried to really spin this as a compromise agreement, but it was a defeat for the White House. They didn't want to have any oversight or approval given to Congress for this particular treaty, and he faced resistance from the Democrats, from his own party, and people like, of course, the New York Senator Chuck Schumer, these kind of Democrats, that he has to really give some kind of concession to Congress on this issue because feeling is rising so high against it. So I think that this is going to be a big problem for Obama going forward if the deal goes through as it's written. And in fact, we've already heard the Iranians saying that the deal as written may not be acceptable to them, to the supreme leader, as he said. And the Iranians may be looking to toughen the deal. At the same time, the Congress is saying, no, this is already too lenient. So I think we're looking ahead. More conflict definitely between President Obama and the Republican-controlled Congress.
All right, now let's talk about matters a little closer to home and coalition building. Now, of course, Naftali Bennett, the head of Biden UD, had meetings with the Prime Minister today, which is the first time they've been having a two-week break. And do you think this is a sign of progress?
I think it has significance because we know that there's a lot of personal animus between Naftali Bennett and Prime Minister Netanyahu, even though ideologically they're certainly the most logical allies. They're two parties, Biden Yehudi and the Likud. You know, we've heard a couple of chatter the past few days about the possibility of a unity government, even rumors and some reports saying that Netanyahu met with Bougie Herzog, the leader of the Labour Party, which they all All parties have denied. You know, I think that was an attempt by the Likud to it was spin by the Likud to put some pressure on Naftali Bennett and Bayit Yehudi to sort of lower their expectations. There were reports that Bennett really wanted to get one of the top portfolios, maybe foreign portfolio that apparently has been promised to Avigdor Lieberman. So from what we're seeing, some reports that maybe Bennett has agreed he'll go back to maybe a boosted economy ministry. Maybe he'll get a kind of new, they'll take that strategic affairs ministry and boost it up as some kind of international relations ministry, give him some seat at the international table. They'll get 2 other ministries. It looks to me like they're moving ahead, Netanyahu. Maybe we're trying to close the deal by the April 22nd deadline next week. But of course, even if he doesn't make that, remember, he'll have 2 more weeks in which to try to seal the deal. So I think there's a sign that he's getting close to that.
All right, now I'd like to ask you about another hot topic right now, and that is the call from 16 European Union foreign ministers that any products that are produced in the settlements be marked. And there have been some reports marked with a yellow tag of some sort, which is particularly in bad taste. I don't know if that part's true.
No, I don't. I think that's coming from Israeli critics of the thing.
Okay, because that is really horrific. But anyway, what do you make about this, and do you think that this will be this will be successful?
Look, let's put this into context first of all. There is already, you might say, singling out or discrimination of Israeli products from the West Bank, from Judea and Samaria, because Israel has a trade agreement with the European Union, which puts it in a class with several other Mediterranean nations that border on the Mediterranean outside Europe, that gets them a break on their products in the EU market on the normal tariffs that are put on other products. So Israeli products already get that break, but that break is not extended to products that come from the West Bank, from Jewish settlements over the Green Line. So there's already a singling out. And in some of the individual countries in Europe, we already see this practice where they do, in fact, mark Israeli products on coming from, as they would say, the occupied territories. Well, this is about extending what some of the individual countries do to a EU policy. This is what we haven't had yet. And reportedly, some of the major countries in the EU are actually opposed to it. For example, Germany doesn't want to see it. So I don't know if this is really a step forward because of, Germany still apparently is against this policy, but it's a warning sign. It's basically the EU or certain countries in the EU basically sending a warning sign to Netanyahu as he starts to form this government, which looks like it's going to be a more right-wing, pro-settler, anti-peace agreement, peace negotiations government, sort of a warning shot from the EU, to say that we are not forgetting about the Palestinian issue, about the settlement issue, and this is clearly could be some conflict going ahead.
Kalev, it is good to have you back, and it was for technical reasons. I should explain to our audience. We're really glad to have you here, so thanks again for coming in tonight.
Pleasure as always. Shabbat Shalom, Aaron, to you and all the viewers.
Thanks, Kalev. Now turning to Israel's annual commemoration of the Holocaust, and one of the most poignant aspects of Remembrance Day is the March of the Living in Poland. Thousands of Jewish adults and teenagers from around the world walked the 3-kilometer distance between Auschwitz and Birkenau, the death camps, including survivors and former captives. The march is dedicated to those who study the history of the Shoah and is part of the activities that examine the roots of prejudice, intolerance, and hate. The first march took place in 1988 and allows young participants to establish a dialogue with survivors in attempts to try to comprehend what happened there. For one student from New York who was experiencing his first visit to a concentration camp, it was a personal lesson of history, but for a Hungarian survivor who was imprisoned at Auschwitz and Dachau, it was a lesson not learned.
I thought maybe the world learned something. I was disappointed they didn't. Genocide, wars continued, so I became very pessimistic. And when I talk to younger groups, I tell them maybe when it will be your turn around this world, you'll know how to learn in peace.
I'm Jewish, so since I want to see history of what it was like, what my ancestors went through, not even like 70 years ago, people are still alive, there's still accounts of this, and I think that it's important for myself and every Jew to come see what happened to our people.
A German blacksmith has painstakingly recreated the iron gate into Dachau, bearing the notorious words Arbeit macht frei, meaning work sets you free. The original was stolen from the memorial site last November, which was the first concentration camp to be set up by the Nazis in 1933. Michael Pointner says that his 1.87-meter-high, 108-kilo replica is as close as possible to the original, and that it will be completed in time for the May 3rd ceremony, marking the 70th anniversary of the camp's liberation by U.S. Army troops. The 36-year-old blacksmith was born in the town of Dachau. He said that he was first concerned about recreating the cynical Nazi slogan, but he did so after realizing the importance of accurately depicting the camp, which receives an estimated 800,000 visitors every year. Just as the nation stood in solemn reflection during the sounding of the 2-minute siren for the Holocaust Remembrance Day, 500 people attended a funeral in Ashdod for a Holocaust survivor who had no immediate family members living in the country. They came in response to an appeal that was issued on social media for 82-year-old Benjamin Schlesinger to receive a respectful burial and have enough mourners to form the minimum quorum minyan of 10 men required by Jewish law for public prayer. One of Schlesinger's distant relatives gave an outpouring of gratitude to those who attended, saying that for them to come to the service for someone that they didn't know proves that the people of Israel are indeed responsible for one another and stand together in times of trouble and need. This was the second time in 1 week that the public responded with such an outpouring of compassion. Hundreds of others heeded the call from friends of the late Chaya Gertman, whose entire family was murdered in the Holocaust, and she was left unable to have children because of medical experimentation at the Auschwitz death camp that she was forced to endure. Hundreds of Israelis came together as the 92-year-old was laid to rest, and many pledged to recite the Kaddish mourner's prayer for her over the next 11 months, as though they are her children. Professor Robert Wistrich of the Sasson Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism told IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan that even though the Holocaust is not likely to be repeated, genocide continues to occur, and that now Christian communities in the Middle East currently face extinction. Wistrich says that anti-Semitism is such an historical phenomenon that it exists even in the absence of Jews. We seem to be having some difficulty.
Historically speaking, you don't. Anti-Semitism without Jews is a phenomenon that we are familiar with as historians, and it's been true already in medieval times. In Britain, that we mentioned previously, after the Jews were expelled and they were not in the country, no physical presence for over 300 years, anti-Semitism in literature, in the liturgy, Christian liturgy, and many other areas of popular culture was alive and well. And we have many examples from our own time, including the Arab world. In 1945, 70 years ago, there were about 1 million Jews living in Arab countries. Today, there is a very small community still in Morocco, a handful of Jews in Yemen, here and there, less than 100 in Egypt. But anti-Semitism is far more intense. So you don't need the Jews. Now, Israel, you could portray, as many do, as the super Jew, and that becomes the substitute and the primary target for all Jews. And it's symbolic target. But in the culture, I would even say in the cultural DNA of countries that have been profoundly influenced from their many centuries ago by Christianity and Islam, you can say that the basis for it is always there, and all that is lacking is the trigger, and the trigger changes.
The ADL one time did a survey of Israeli high schoolers asking them if the Holocaust could ever be repeated, and they said no. What do you as a historian believe?
First of all, no event repeats itself completely. In other words, every historic event is in some sense unique, even though we are certainly draw analogies and we compare, and that's part of the process of understanding. The Holocaust as we know it from 1939 to 45 will not repeat itself. But a genocide, some form or other, has, at fairly frequent intervals since World War II, occurred in different parts of the world. Jews have not been the primary target. But that is simply because of what we mentioned before, that today there are two major concentrations. In Israel, which is a state that can defend itself, and the United States, where conditions are more favorable. In the Middle East, if there were large Jewish communities as there have been in 1945 today, Jews would be experiencing exactly what the Christian communities are experiencing. They're on the road to extinction. They are being massacred. They're being driven out, expelled. So that's not a Holocaust, but it's a mass persecution with dire consequences.
In financial news, the shekel today ended the trading week with a mixed performance against all major foreign currencies, and due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. The IBA weather team tells us that we can expect the chance of mist in the coastal plain in northwestern Negev later tonight, although tomorrow we're likely to see clear to partly cloudy skies and slightly warmer temperatures. Here's a look at the forecast over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow, and I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.